Supercuts!
For decades, fluoride has been added to U.S. drinking water under the banner of dental health. Officials call it one of the greatest public health successes of the 20th century, credited with slashing rates of tooth decay. But behind the official story lurks one of the longest-running, most persistent conspiracy theories in America. That fluoride in our water isn't about teeth at all. It's about control.
Tooth decay got you down? To maintain the aesthetics and health of your teeth, try Illuminate with fluoride. It strengthens your enamel, defends your teeth against bacteria and plaque, and protects your gums from gingivitis. And unlike non-fluoride toothpaste, it promotes new bone formation, giving you that pearly white smile you've always dreamed of. Exposure to fluoride may cause tooth discoloration, weakened enamel, and dental fluorosis, allergic or hypersensitive skin reactions, gastric distress and headache, as well as sleep disorder, diminished IQ, inability to focus, memory loss, lethargy, and weakness may occur. More serious fluoride side effects include brain cancer, DNA damage, thyroid disruption, Alzheimer's disease, accelerated aging, skeletal fluorosis, pineal gland calcification, and in rare cases may be fatal. Overdose of fluoride symptoms may include nausea, vomiting, stomach pain, diarrhea, drooling, numbness or tingling, loss of feeling anywhere in your body, muscle stiffness or seizure. Fluoride ingestion may also disrupt the synthesis of collagen and lead to a breakdown of collagen in bone, tendon, muscle, skin, cartilage, lungs, kidney, trachea, and arteries. If you experience any of these behaviors, contact your doctor immediately. Say cheese with confidence. Visit any retailer anywhere for Illuminate toothpaste with fluoride.
The theory goes like this. Fluoride doesn't just harden enamel, it also builds up in the pineal gland, the tiny acorn-shaped gland in our brain linked to sleep cycles, hormones, and in many traditions, spiritual awakening. Some call it the third eye. The ideal is that fluoride calcifies the gland, keeping us docile, compliant, and cut off from deeper spiritual awareness. In other words, an intentionally dulled-down population is a much easier one to manage.
In 1993, I was working at Rockefeller Center in New York as a radio producer for the BBC. And I got a call from London. There was a local water fluoridation battle in the north of England, in Leeds. And the producers, it was a daytime radio show. You and Yours was the name of the program. And the producer said, "Chris, what do you know about fluoride? What do the Yanks think about fluoride? Is there an American angle?" And it was a very, familiar request to me. Is there an American angle to the story? And I said, "Look, I don't know fluoride from a hole in the wall. I have no idea about fluoride, but let me make a few phone calls and see if I can't help you out." And my first call was to Ralph Nader in Washington. And I'm not sure why I called Ralph Nader, but look, it was a consumer issue. And Mr. Consumer, Ralph Nader, I thought, let's give him a call. And I got through, and he said, "Look, I don't know a great deal about water fluoridation, but I've never had terribly good feelings about it. Here are the names of a couple of scientists you ought to speak with." And he gave me the names of Dr. William Hersey, who then and now is a chemist at the Environmental Protection Agency, and Dr. Robert J. Carton. Bob Carton had been with EPA, but at that time was then over at the U.S. Army. And I went down to Washington and met with Dr. Hersey and Dr. Carton, and they explained to me that the safety standards for water fluoridation in this country are based on fraudulent science.
The history is just as strange as the theory. In the 1950s, Detractors claimed fluoridation was a communist plot to weaken Americans. Others tied it to Nazi Germany, saying fluoride was used to pacify prisoners. Historians have debunked those claims, but the rumors never died. In fact, with today's growing distrust in institutions, the fluoride debate has found new life.
Fluoride. Dentists say that drinking it can protect your teeth against cavities. Cities and towns all across the world actually dump it into the water supply, hoping to indiscriminately medicate the population through their tap water faucets. The official story on fluoride sounds wonderful. Drink the stuff and you won't get cavities, we're told. It's a nice story. But there's another side to this story, the side you're never told. And it starts with the astonishing but verifiable fact that nearly all the fluoride dripped into municipal water supplies isn't naturally occurring fluoride at all. In fact, it's actually a combination of hexafluorosilicic acid and sodium silicofluoride. These two chemicals are considered highly toxic by the EPA. They're actually classified as hazardous waste, and when packaged for transportation, they must be labeled as poison and handled by workers wearing industrial safety gear. So, what are hexafluorosilicic acid and sodium silicofluoride, and where do they come from? That's the part of this story that you probably won't believe. That is, not until you check it out for yourself.
Fluoride defenders will say there's two stories. There's the industrial story and there's the dental story, and ne'er the twain shall meet. It's not true. The stories are braided very tightly and very profoundly, and they're braided from the beginning. The very first suggestion that fluoride be added to public water supplies was made by a researcher, Harold Hodgej, at the Mellon Institute in Pittsburgh. Hodgej became interested in fluoride because of the suggestion of Francis Frary. That's the letter I uncovered. Francis Frary is the director of the aluminum laboratory for the Aluminum Company of America. He is very concerned about fluoride pollution around aluminum plants. He's very concerned about what the fluoride is doing to the workers inside these aluminum plants. But his suggestion to Harold Hodgej is to look at fluoride's dental effects. And it's upon the basis of that suggestion that Harold Hodgej makes his proposal to add fluoride to public water supplies. Right at the very source of the stream, you find the aluminum industry.
Because the more you look into the mythology of fluoride, the more bizarre this story becomes. And this bizarre story begins at phosphate mining companies. Phosphate is an important mineral used in fertilizers. It's mined from natural rock deposits scattered across the world, and the phosphate rock is then refined to produce phosphoric acid. If that name sounds familiar, that's because it's one of the main ingredients in carbonated sodas, such as Coke and Pepsi. Phosphoric acid is often compared to battery acid. It's a highly acidic liquid that is believed to be the primary reason why drinking sodas can result in kidney stones and a loss of bone mineral density. Phosphate rock is also used to create fertilizers. The problem is phosphate is often contaminated with high levels of fluoride, as much as 40,000 parts per million, or up to 4% of the raw ore. To remove the fluoride, sulfuric acid is added to a wet slurry of phosphate and water. This causes the fluoride to vaporize, creating highly toxic gaseous compounds such as hydrogen fluoride and silicon tetrafluoride. These toxic fluoride chemicals used to be released directly from the smokestacks of phosphate mining operations, but the nearby farms suffered devastating losses of cattle, and food crops, which withered away and died due to, guess what? Fluoride poisoning. In order to stop this environmental destruction, the phosphate mining industry put in place a way to capture the toxic fluoride chemical vapors so that they wouldn't be released into the air and kill the surrounding livestock and vegetation. This was accomplished by installing wet scrubbers that captured the toxic fluoride chemicals, preventing them from being released into the environment and killing the plant and animal life living nearby. It is from these wet scrubbers that toxic fluoride chemicals are now harvested. They're collected, repackaged, shipped to your local city, and then dumped into the municipal water supply. So instead of these toxic fluoride chemicals being released by the phosphate mining smokestacks, they are instead captured and then released into the water supply of large cities, where the chemicals then contaminate the water of millions of people at a time. This is called water fluoridation.
Now, science complicates the picture. Studies have found that fluoride can accumulate in the pineal gland, especially with age. In high amounts, it might influence melatonin and even puberty. Other research links very high fluoride exposure, far above U.S. water levels, so we're told, to kidney damage, bone cancer, and reduced IQ in children. But at the levels used in community fluoridation, 0.7 to 1.2 parts per million, most health organizations insist it's safe and effective.
Cox's suggestion that we add fluoride to public water supplies needs to be understood for who was saying it and where he was saying it and what the track record of the Mellon Institute was. The Mellon Institute was a leading defender of asbestos for the asbestos industry. You know, today, industry are facing a tidal wave, a crippling tidal wave of lawsuits from people who have had their health damaged, who've been killed by asbestos. Well, for generations, the Mellon Institute produced research that said that mesothelioma was caused by something other than asbestos. That's how you have to understand the fluoride issue. Industry was concerned about fluoride pollution and about lawsuits of a similar magnitude for fluoride pollution. So it's no coincidence that the Mellon Institute makes the first suggestion that fluoride be added to public water supplies.
When dentists and doctors say they support fluoride in the water supply, what they're really saying is that they support the mass poisoning of the population with a highly toxic, hazardous waste product that, if it weren't dripped into the water supply, it would have to be disposed of as a highly toxic, hazardous waste under strict EPA regulations. Curiously, it is a violation of federal law to dump hexafluorosilicic acid or sodium silicofluoride into the water. Such an act, in fact, is considered an act of terrorism. Yet it is mysteriously allowed today as long as it is accompanied by a loosely justified claim that we're doing this to stop cavities. But setting aside for the moment the inconvenient truth that water fluoridation involves the illegal act of dumping hazardous waste into the water supply, there's another important question in all this. Do these toxic fluoride chemicals actually prevent cavities?
So where does that leave us? On one hand, there's no clear proof that fluoride at standard levels is calcifying our third eye. On the other hand, it's also true that fluoride is a biologically active substance that accumulates in the body over time, and long-term studies are limited at this time.
Roughly 99% of the municipal water pumped through any given city never ends up in the mouths of the people. Most water is used for showering, washing dishes, washing clothes, watering yards, and filling pools. Almost none of the fluoride dripped into the water supply comes into contact with human teeth. It does, however, end up downstream, where it contaminates rivers, streams, and ultimately the oceans of our world. In this way, water fluoridation policies have become a convenient loophole through which the phosphate mining industry can dump its toxic waste byproducts into the environment without adhering to any EPA regulations whatsoever. Phosphate mining companies even turn a profit by selling their hazardous waste to cities, then labeling it fluoride, even though this name is scientifically inaccurate. All this raises an obvious question. If fluoride kills cows and crops and fish and is considered a hazardous waste chemical by the EPA, then how could it be healthy to ingest?
The role of a key scientist, Dr. Harold Hodgej, in the fluoride debate. Dr. Harold Hodgej, for most of the Cold War, was the leading scientific defender of the safety of low doses of fluoride and the beneficial effects of water fluoridation.
Dr. Harold Hodgej, a distinguished toxicologist on the Rochester team, has carefully investigated the safety of fluoridation.
Well, to put it very simply, fluoride is safe at 1 part per million.
No scientist's word was trusted more by the health establishment than Dr. Harold Hodgej when it came to fluoride. He was a very senior figure and operated at the highest levels for almost all his scientific career.
This brings us back to the fundamental point. Fluoride is safe, and I think I can say in conclusion that there is no health hazard that justifies postponing water fluoridation.
Harold Hodgej, we now know, was a co-orchestrator of the human radiation experiments in which citizens in hospitals at Rochester and in Oak Ridge were injected with plutonium by scientists under Harold Hodgej's direction.
And there's a whole book written about that.
That's right. We know about Harold Hodgej in part because of the work of investigative reporters such as Eileen Welsom, who won a Pulitzer Prize for discovering the names of the people who had been injected with plutonium. Harold Hodgej's name surfaced in that book and surfaced in the subsequent presidential inquiry into the human radiation experiments. You join the dots. If Harold Hodgej and the University of Rochester are injecting people with plutonium and uranium, and at the same time they are reassuring us about fluoride safety, what's the connection? The documents that I uncovered with Joel Griffiths in the files of the Manhattan Project and the Atomic Energy Commission are very clear and very explicit. The toxicology department at the University of Rochester, which was under the direction of Harold Hodgej, was asked to come up with medical information that could help the government in lawsuits in which the United States Army and the US government were being charged with fluoride pollution. Not a hope that Harold Hodgej would ever say that water fluoridation was dangerous or that fluoride in small doses was toxic, because if Harold Hodgej were to say that, it would have pulled the rug out from under the US Army and from under the project to build nuclear weapons. For people who know the history of medicine and science in this country, you know, the Kettering Laboratory was at one time one of the largest private laboratories dealing with issues of toxicity. It was a very well-funded laboratory, and its director, Robert Kehoe, was a very senior figure in the public health establishment. Today, we know Kehoe's name best for his career-long defense of the safety of adding lead to gasoline. Kehoe spent a professional lifetime from his pulpit at the Kettering Laboratory assuring the nation that lead added to gasoline was entirely safe. Of course, that's been thoroughly discredited. The toll of health injuries, of neurological injury injuries to children alone from adding lead to gasoline is almost incalculable. And you know, for that, we really can thank Dr. Robert Kehoe. He soldiered on lead's behalf for his professional lifetime, and he did so being paid by the Ethyl Corporation, who were the makers of tetraethyl lead. The same job that Robert Kehoe did laundering lead's image on industry's behalf, he did for fluoride. Kehoe, along with Harold Hodgej, was a leading defender of fluoride safety in the workplace, and he also was a leading promoter of water fluoridation.
Add in the fact that nobody can really opt out of fluoridated water without filters or bottled alternatives, and you have fertile ground for suspicion.
The truth about fluoride is a lot like the truth about Enron or Goldman Sachs or every other shocking revelation that nobody believed until it suddenly became obvious that we were all being fooled for so long. Fluoride is a clever scheme where a hazardous waste chemical is dumped into the environment by passing it through the bodies of people first. We, the people, have become the toxic waste dump site of the phosphate mining industry, and chances are your local dentist fully supports this entire process. Over the last several decades, an astonishing 24 studies have established a statistical link between fluoride exposure and low IQs in children. One study conducted by the Center for Endemic Disease Control in China found that each additional milligram of fluoride detected in every liter of a child's urine was associated with a 0.59 point decrease in their IQ score. Another study found that fluoride exposure slashed the number of children achieving high IQs by more than 70%. It shouldn't be surprising, of course, to learn that consuming a hazardous chemical might impair brain function. Water fluoridation, it turns out, may be the root cause of the alarming drop in academic aptitude among children in first world nations. Historically speaking, the mathematics that were taught to 8th graders in the 1950s are now college-level courses in 2011. Maybe the reason why Johnny can't read or spell is because Johnny's been drinking too much fluoride.
The selling of fluoride to the American public was done by the best in the business, by the father of public relations, Edward Bernay. Edward Bernay is Sigmund Freud's nephew, and he was a Machiavellian genius, small in size, yet cast a towering shadow over the 20th century. Bernay understood that there was a liberal sentiment coursing through the 20th century, and that if you could hitch your commercial wagon to that star, then you could make your clients a lot of money. In 1916, Bernay had suffragettes march in the Easter parade in New York City holding cigarettes as torches of liberty. And he cooked up that scheme on behalf of the American Tobacco Company and its director, George Hill, who was paying Bernay's salary. Well, my book uncovers correspondence between Bernay's and the National Institutes of Dental Research. Bernay's was asked to come to Washington by the NIDR to help create their PR campaign to sell fluoride to the nation. Bernay's understood that people have an unconscious trust in their doctor or their dentist, and if you can persuade doctors and dentists that fluoride is safe and good, then you're able to reach the rest of the nation. People believe they're doctors and dentists, and that was a way of promoting fluoride for Bernay's.
At its heart, the fluoride conspiracy reflects a much bigger question. Do we trust that governments and industries always put our best interests first, or do we assume there's another agenda behind the curtain?
Very few dentists are aware that the fluoride in public water supplies is a pharmaceutical-grade product. It is in fact an industrial waste. It's the waste from the Florida phosphate industry. In the 1950s, the Florida phosphate industry was being sued by farmers and citizens living near those plants because of the fluoride. It was killing their cattle, destroying their crops. You know, the Florida phosphate industry today is prevented from having to dispose of its industrial effluent in a toxic waste dump by the device of shipping that in tanker trucks around the country and dumping it in our water supply. From the beginning, opposition to fluoride has been equated with believing the earth is flat or being against the United Nations. Opposition to fluoride is equated with quackery or paranoia, and in fact that's really a media smear. In 1950, the public health endorsed water fluoridation. Almost immediately, there was a national movement against fluoride, and that was led by Dr. George Wolbott. We should all know George Wolbott's name. He was the first physician to warn of the dangers of fatal allergic reaction to penicillin. Wolbott was one of the first physicians to warn of the dangers of emphysema from smoking. He saw in his own surgery, in his practice in Detroit, Michigan, that people were coming in with these ailments, unexplained ailments, whether it was back pain or gastric distress, muscle fatigue, headaches, and he figured out that it was low-dose fluoride. That, as with a lot of drugs or chemicals, there's a small subset of people who are uniquely allergic to the chemical, and Wolbott realized that it was fluoride, and he performed a whole series of double-blind experiments where people were given some fluoridated water without knowing it, and the symptoms recurred. And very quickly, Wolbott's name, rather than being seen as this giant of public health, committed to safeguarding public health, somebody who would warn us about penicillin or tobacco, suddenly George Wolbott becomes this marginal fringe figure who is criticized for his opposition to fluoride, and that's something that takes place again and again and again. Speaking out as a doctor or a dentist against fluoride is the third rail. It's fatal to your career. We don't know George Wolbott's name because he was smeared by the Public Health Service for his opposition to fluoride.
They essentially attempt to mass medicate the entire population with what can only be called a drug, a biologically active chemical that they claim can prevent a health condition. And yet, has this drug called fluoride ever received FDA approval as a drug? Have the individual members of the population been individually assessed for their need for such a drug? Have medication doses and drug interactions been considered? Has anyone even been written a prescription for this drug? The answer is no. Fluoride is an unapproved drug being used in a highly illegal mass medication scheme that provides an excuse for the real agenda of disposing of a highly toxic, hazardous waste chemical.
Whether you see fluoride as a harmless cavity fighter, a slow spiritual sedative, or something in between, the conversation forces us to think critically about what we consume every single day, sometimes without even knowing it.